You're listening to Trust Talks and Digital Dives with me, your host, Joni Brennan, President of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. We feature industry leaders, policymakers, and innovators who power our economy and protect our data. Whether you're a technology professional, business leader, or just curious about how digital trust transforms our world, we connect you to the insights that matter. Let's dive deep into digital trust. Hello and welcome to Trust Talks and Digital Dives. We have a fantastic discussion lined up today, something that's near and dear for my own heart, which is around travel credentials. And so if you're like me and you've gone through the airport and you're pulling out all kinds of IDs, tickets, and all these kinds of things, then you understand well how that can be, you don't want to worry about losing these things and you want to have that security as you're going through that travel journey. So we're going to talk about the digital travel credential space, some of the work that's happening there, what to look out for, where this is going, where this space is going, and some of the standards that you should be paying attention to. And we're going to feature some fantastic organizations who are working hard on the challenges and opportunities in this space. So I have with us today Adam Lemmon, who is Director of MATTR Labs at MATTR. So it's wonderful to have you, Adam. We have Ciaran Carolan, who is PKD Program Manager at ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization. And we have McCaskill, who is Vice President for Identity Management Programs and Services at AAMVA, and that is the American Association for Motor Vehicle Administrators. Welcome, folks. I'm so thrilled to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Joni.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So let's dive into it. Certainly I'd like to start us off with focusing on standardization and interoperability. And certainly there are so many standards, technical policy and practices space in the world that we live in, and these standards help to make our lives, hopefully remove complexity from us and make our lives simpler as we go forward. So for the folks here, what would you say are the key international standards that are shaping digital travel credentials for today, and particularly we'll do a little round the virtual room for AAMVA, ICAO, and MATTR. How are you each uniquely contributing to this standardization and interoperability space? And I'll go in the opposite order of how I introduced you. So maybe I'll start with you, Michael, and your take on your experience with AAMVA and standardization and interoperability. What should we be paying attention to?
Sure. So obviously, a person who has a travel credential wants it to work when they need it to work, and they want it to work every time that they need it to work. Well, one of the ways you do that is you standardize the processes, the data flows, and the interoperability around those credentials. At AAMVA, and what we've done in that space is we've been working on the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO 18013 Part 5 standard, which is the MDL mobile driver license standard. How have we been working on that? Well, we have actually chaired the working group inside of ISO that built the standard from the ground up. And they built it around privacy, security, and interoperability. We brought to that space the issuing authorities' perspective. So in the US and in Canada, states and provinces issue the driving credential, and in the US, especially, the identity document is also issued by the state issuing authority, which is a driver license group. And so their input was desperately needed in that group, in the organization, to say, this is what we have to have in order for us to issue a credential digitally that can work as an identity document. And so we put that information together, presented it to the working group. We actually have a colleague of mine, Lafi Jordan, who chairs that working group. And we have built out and published an in-person 18013 Part 5 standard that is actually used today at TSA for those jurisdictions in North America or in the US who have issued an MDL thus far. So that's our take in the space.
That's amazing. And we have a range of listeners in terms of their experience. And so it's important to note there that a mobile driver's license isn't just something that happens to be on your mobile phone. There is a standard behind it in terms of how it's issued, how it's implemented. That's a very specific thing. So I think that's a great way to get us started off. Thanks, Michael. I want to toss it over to you, Ciaran. Same view on standards. Any others that you want to call out from Michael's references?
Yeah, so good day to you and good day to everybody listening. In ICAO, let me start with the organization. We're all about standards in every way. That's essentially what we do. We are a regulatory entity for international civil aviation. And when we speak about standards, we do both regulatory standards and technical standards or technical specifications, I would call them. So in our space, we're dealing in facilitation with documents and methodologies and processes for cross-border travel. We have the regulatory standards. For example, a passport should be the document that's accepted for identity proofing in the context of cross-border travel international. That's a rule, a legislative rule. And then we do the technical specifications. This is what a passport looks like. And we've been doing the passport as a paper document for decades. So that's a standard, a global standard that facilitates recognition and facilitates global interoperability. Everybody knows the data that's in there, can understand it, can read it, and can use it in their processes, particularly from an immigration, customs, and governmental standpoint. Now, obviously, over a recent 1 or 2 decades, we've been going a little bit more digital and electronic. So building on the paper passport, we've had for about 20 years now the electronic passport, which is the passport with the chip in it. And now we're going digital with the ICAO digital travel credential, which is moving forward with electronic capabilities on a mobile phone or other things, similar other mechanisms to convey this information in electronic or digital format. So this is all standards through the years, building with backwards compatibility, and that's something really important for us, so that travelers and governments and authorities can utilize the same equipment or very similar equipment and build processes over time to enhance security, enhance facilitation, enhance efficiency and convenience. And it's all built around standards so that everybody works properly together and everybody can cooperate at the international level. I'll just add what I do, particularly as you asked the question. I'm responsible for a system, the PKD, or the Public Key Directory, that's focused on the electronic and digital parts of this. So the last 20 years of work or so on the passport that facilitates the sharing of information internationally that's required for verification, authentication of these credentials. And every trust framework, every ecosystem like that also needs some form of cooperation mechanisms, dissemination mechanisms to function. And the ICAO PKD, I think, is a good example of this at the international level.
Yeah, thanks so much. So much in there, and we could honestly spend a whole day on the standards landscape in general. And I love that you also called out that there are different kinds of standards. And so some are at the national level, some are at the international level, some are at the industry level, and how they come together, technical and policy based, and how they kind of come together to support trust across an ecosystem. So lots in there. Thanks so much, Ciaran. Adam, over to you. Same question.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think it's been a fantastic evolution over the last, decade or so, I would say. And, on the MATTR side, we probably came at this 6 or 7 years ago more from a, self-sovereign identity, digital identity perspective. And it's interesting, how a lot of these worlds are starting to collide. And, 5, 6 years ago, there was the credential format discussions, W3C, VC data model discussions, and then alongside of that, it was, oh my gosh, how are we going to move these things across the internet? How are we going to get them from issuers into wallets? How are we going to get them from wallets to relying parties? And some of this work was happening, in parallel, but in very different, areas, groups, collaborators, contributors, et cetera. So over the last 3, 4 years, I think the clear direction has largely been around, mobile driver's licenses, mobile documents, and, the 18013 part 5 spec that Mike mentioned is quite elegant because it has the whole data format, cryptography, as well as the presentation protocol communication side of it, which I think was a very powerful implementation interoperability target for entities to look at and aim to implement, that sort of answered all the questions of how do I do this? How do I do that? There wasn't a lot of ambiguity necessarily left, that there was a, profile you could implement against. So I think that that has been extremely, extremely exciting. And then seeing a lot of the work that was happening, in parallel of these credential formats now being brought in for the online communication of these documents, OID for VP getting brought in to some extent for part 7 within that 18013 spec has been exciting to see, come to life to some extent over the last year or so. Understanding, there's sort of 4 subsections within that there's still some refinements ongoing, but I think that those areas would definitely be the areas that we're focused on and very excited about. And it's been fantastic to see the consolidation and support building globally as well.
Yeah, that there's a lot of interest in there, and you called out a handful of technical specifications as well, technical standards as well, and I think maybe drawing a line between all 3 of your comments, it is always encouraging and I think realistic to see the evolution over time of the standards. And so even like something like OpenID through its first run to connect 2.0 to connect to now the VPVC ecosystem. So these are just examples of how these standards evolve over time. And I think there's a ton of value in that. So thanks so much for each of you for all that you're doing in that standardization and interoperability space and sharing that with through our discussion today. So working in and across the standardization and interoperability landscape, the other thing that's kind of interesting, at least for me, is I do have a driver's license, and I know that the driver's license is really a credential to show that I have the right to drive, that I have the permission or I've met the need to drive. That said, every time we go into a situation where a government issued ID is asked for, that driver's license has become a very powerful tool. This is what we choose. This is what I choose to present. I could choose to present something else, or if I'm going international, a passport. But yeah, these credentials can be used in, people can choose to use them in different ways, and the organizations that need to verify the identity can choose which ones they want to accept. So in that context, and thinking about how credentials are being used in different ways and adding value in different ways, what are some advice or some experience on how digital credentials can actually balance the security requirements along with the privacy enhancing principles and privacy, knowing that we've got different privacy regimes as well in different places around the world? How can digital credentials help to balance that security and privacy needs, and particularly protecting travelers' information as they're going through their journey end to end? I'll open that up to the floor, anyone who wants to take it.
Okay, I'll start.
Great.
With the MDL standard, that full stack, and I think I should say right out of the chute that similar to the ICAO model, we use PKI also in cryptography for authentication and to secure the data. But 2 words come to mind for the privacy and security of the customer, and that's data minimization. The MDL allows for you to convey to a relying party only what you need to convey for that transaction. For a TSA checkpoint, they need to know your name, your gender, your date of birth, and then they match that against the flight manifest and say, yep, you're supposed to be here. That's all you share. You don't share address and every other thing. For a benefit package, just say you need to be a certain age to garner a benefit from government or somewhere else. All you really need to show is that you are your picture, your photo, and that you're over that age criteria or you're under that age criteria. The MDL allows for that. That allows you to show a picture and that you're over 65 or over 21 or whatever. So by doing that, you're not giving the relying party anything that they don't need, and you're not giving them any personal information that you don't want them to have, which means you're securing your data, you're increasing your privacy. And one more item for MDL, at least in the in-person use case, actually in the over-the-net internet use case too. There's no, it's all offline, which means that your data is coming from you, your device, to the relying party, and it's not going back to the issuing authority for any reason to provide that data. So there's no, what we'll call tracking of your use. Your issuing authority doesn't know when or where you use it. Just like today, they don't know when and where you use your physical card. So that's the same principle that's involved here. So those items, data minimization, is what the privacy and security mechanisms are built around, which was part of the tenets that we used in building the stack to start with.
Maybe I can jump in there as well, because I think some of the from a user holder perspective, some of the exciting properties are also that it's very difficult to be impersonated in this manner, right? Where, you know, the MDLs are device bound, and there's, you know, different layers of holder, you know, actual human binding to the MDLs, whether it's a, you know, device level authentication, or we're talking, you know, further extended liveness and, you know, photo matching against the portrait, where as a user, you can have that level of comfort that it's not as easy to just pick up my ID, you know, and hand it to someone in a, you know, dimly lit, you know, room, or someone that, you know, does not have any idea how to validate these things. So there's also that level of, you know, protection and security that I think is a, you know, often underappreciated, you know, benefit for users. Maybe the other piece that I would just add on as it relates to, you know, tracking or correlation pushback that sometimes come up is that, you know, there is the ability to have unique instances of the credential that can be used across, because the incremental cost to, you know, mint or issue one extra payload or, you know, MDL to a device is near zero. You can have potentially multiple instances that can be used at specific relying parties. So even though there isn't, you know, technically at the cryptography level, non-correlatable approaches, you can still facilitate that. And I know some of the platform wallets do take approaches like this today, which gives, you know, even that next layer of like zero opportunity at all. It's great to remove, obviously, the issuing authority phone home. There's absolutely none of that. But then the fact that you can also create, you know, fully pseudonymous, you know, down to the cryptographic level, no signatures that can be correlated or anything like that potentially as well. So we really are, you know, creating quite a strong, safe and secure approach, really on both sides of the transaction too.
Can I jump in, Joni?
Yeah,
I'd like to add on a couple of things, because really interesting points raised here. I want to start from where Michael began. He mentioned data minimization. I think implying selective disclosure is another way of describing what he was speaking about. And I want to take that forward. And the ICAO digital travel credential that I mentioned in my opening response doesn't have data minimization, or it doesn't have selective disclosure. I would say to an extent it does have minimized data, because it has the minimum data set necessary for cross-border travel, which is our use case. That's what we're building the ICAO digital travel credential for. So it's a minimum data set, but it does not offer the possibility for just disclosing a portion of that e-passport or digital travel credential. We don't have that. And that's because when you cross a border, the officer doesn't say, well, I want your name, but I don't want your date of birth. You know, they want what's in the passport. So our particular use case is a specific one we're building for, and we implement security and we implement a credential to fulfill that use case. It's not something we're building, for example, for the use that Michael described of age attestation, for example, when you're shopping. We're not building for that. In selective disclosure is very powerful in that context and that use, and I fully agree with what Michael said, but it's not what we are developing for. So I think it's really important to reflect on the fact that there's different credentials with different purposes, and we shouldn't look at them and say, well, there's one credential that has to do everything and fulfills everything. Ours is for a particular purpose. The mobile driving license 18013 is for other purposes. They're complementary sometimes for some use cases. They can substitute each other, and in other cases, they don't. But what's always there, no matter what the credential that we're speaking about, the emphasis on security, electronic security, user security is always there. So the other item that was mentioned, for example, user tracking, something really important for ICAO as well, that there is no possibility for user tracking. And when you ask the question, how do we protect security? How do we protect privacy? I think a really critical point is co-creation and working together amongst stakeholders to define the final solution. Michael started off speaking about his organization's contribution to the standardization in ISO for 18013. Absolutely very valuable. We do similar things. We're working with ISO on our standards, standardization efforts and creation of application-specific profiles, like I mentioned, for those standards with the international community. So in the context of what was raised, different legislative frameworks, what can work internationally. It can be difficult to land on something that works for everybody in a massive global sense, but the only way you can achieve that is by working collectively with everybody together and making sure all security and privacy matters are taken into account from a usability perspective, from multi-stakeholder perspective, and with the strong participation of industry and experts and cryptographic experts, etc., who can ensure that the end results that the user wants are fully realized with the technologies that are put into place with technical specifications.
Yeah, such important points. All around, including that. Yeah, there's no single credential for every use case out there. In fact, I get a little nervous when things go down to the number of one. I like to have multiples, maybe not 500, but a set that I can choose which ones need to be used and when. But also the idea of me as an average user choosing to use a credential, really, it's that choice depends on the context of the situation. And so I, as a person who has traveled quite a bit around the world, I don't have an expectation of going to an airport and being anonymous. Like I that's just not part of that use case, right? So we know that there are different situations that have different requirements, and having similar patterns across for verification for these tools and being able to present what's needed for that use case, which actually might require a record was kept that something happened, thinking like in the finance space or something like that. So there are a lot of facets to this space on privacy and security. And I love where you left off. We've done research in DIACC. One of the things that our research showed is that people in general do have more comfort when they see different stakeholders working together on problems, because they'll have checks and balances on each other, which tends to have a better result in the public's perspective of how these advancements come forward. So I talked a little bit about the other piece of that is I can't wait for the day I get every tax season I get an email that says from a particular organization, and I say I need my tax receipt, and they say take a picture of your driver's license and email it to us for your privacy. I know that's not for my privacy, that's for their liability, two very different things. But I can't wait for the time when I can actually present that credential digitally in that case. And I know that it's coming. So that's my own selfish benefit for me as an adopter. But let's talk a bit about the benefits for adopters in this ecosystem. What are some of the, what would you say are some of the key benefits for different stakeholders in the digital travel credential ecosystem? And we can talk about benefits for travelers, for airlines, for hotels, for governments. Let's open it up, and maybe why don't we start with you, Adam? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah,
to start?
sure.
Great.
And I mean, answer probably won't be super tailored to travel, but more of sort of what we're hearing globally as it relates to, digital credential adoption and benefits. So I think consistently we've seen this, bump in risk, bump in friction, bump in risk, bump in friction that has led to, some pretty challenging user experiences, whether it is, trying to take photos, emailing photos of analog credentials, continuing to add more and more friction to address the risk that continues to arise. And I think, largely for the first time now, we have government issued, cryptographically verifiable, deterministic, more or less verification approaches that can help to really curb both of these dimensions. So, with an MDL, for example, you can reduce risk, and in the same stroke, reduce friction as well, because it is just easier for users. So it is, quite nice at that macro level to be able to move the needle in both of those dimensions. And I think that leads to the core areas of benefit that we hear, which the first is always, increase conversion, increase throughput, help the good guys get through quicker. We obviously understand that, in the near term, the bad guys aren't going to be looking at digital credentials. The bad guys are not going to be trying to, trying to use MDLs. So it's more, express lane for the good guys, make sure they get through with as little friction as possible, as little cost as possible, et cetera. And then the other piece being the, risk side, and largely as that relates to, false acceptances. So, letting the bad guys through, or false rejects, meaning leaving the good guys out, which then has the knock-on effect of, several different dimensions of cost factors, where you let the bad guys in, there's, can be significant consequences thereafter. And if you start rejecting the good guys, then they're hitting your support desks, they're, changing providers, there's a lot of other challenges on that side of things. So I'd say those are the primary dimensions that we hear from a, relying party acceptance side of things. And then users, I mean, everything that we hear is convenience, ease of use, speed. If it's going to be quicker for me, if it's going to be easier, then, I'm interested to use it. I'd say I haven't heard of too much, on the privacy or security side as being drivers for change. But it really is, if I'm going to get through the airport more, I used, TSA touchless yesterday in New York, and it was just faster. I didn't ask too many questions. So I think some of those key drivers and benefits do remain on the user side of things.
Yeah, great. Ciaran, Michael, any other benefits you folks want to call out?
Jump in. I think I can give something concrete, even in terms of numbers, and maybe add something on to Adam. So the efficiency part for the user, in our case, the traveler, is definitely there. So we have, we with our stakeholders, it's at the national level, for example, in Finland and in Netherlands, I've run pilots with digital travel credentials about crossing borders, going through immigration, and you see the time required going from about 30 seconds to about 7 seconds, I think, on average, if I recall the numbers correctly. So that's quite an efficiency gain by having the two parts to it. One, you have your credential a little bit easier to scan and have ready. But the big part of the efficiency gain that's being arrived at through the use of the digital travel credential is that the data can be submitted in advance to the authorities who are handling it. So the first time that the authority, let's say the immigration authority, is seeing it is not the time that the traveler comes. That traveler can choose, if they wish, to submit the credential in advance. Because it's cryptographically signed using the PKI, they can establish trust in the data that is submitted to them in advance. In the travel use case, Adam touched on it already, the biometrics, the face is in our credential. So when they arrive, there's a simple facial image check, maybe a scan to show they have a document, but not a full scan and reading. So that's where the time savings come from. But I think it's also important to say that this leads, I think, or can lead, if properly done, to great security improvements as well, because rather than having to screen and interrogate all your databases and checks in the space of the 30 seconds that the person is traveling, you've received this information and have time to do those interrogations and respond if there's a need. So from an authority perspective, it's reducing the infrastructural demand, because obviously people get through quicker. So you invest in technology rather than investing in bricks and mortar. But there's also, if done properly, a great potential for security improvement, because you can concentrate your focus as an authority on anomalies or discrepancies. and potentially clear them, hopefully before the traveler arrives, or if not, focus your efforts in person on the people associated with those anomalies. So a lot of positives for both sides of the travel equation. And we're seeing that in our pilots, and I think it's something a lot of people associated with ICAO are really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, a slightly different angle, but similar outcome. For relying parties, I'll do a conservative estimate in North America. For the physical card, if you assume that a jurisdiction may have 3 versions of the same type of credential out at any given time, and they have 4 types, that's just a conservative number. Maybe they have 7, maybe they have 10. In North America, that's about 1,000 different types of credentials that somebody has to look at and try to determine in less than 5 seconds that it's real and it belongs to the person standing in front of them when they accept it. That means that, and this is impossible, but to do that properly, you'd have to know every security feature that you're looking for in every card, what it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to be stacked, where it's supposed to be on the card, and that we know, humanity, there's no way we can do that. We have trouble identifying somebody by looking at the picture and looking at them. I mean, just that is as difficult as a human eye. So for a relying party, what the MDOC does, the MDL does, is it's immediate. It's an immediate, I scanned this or I read this MDL, it authenticated using PKI. And when that happened, you know that that's the real credential issued by an issuing authority. I didn't even talk about the $120 versions of 3 different fake cards that you can get from China at any moment in your life, and they look better than the credentials that we issue in North America. So I'm not even talking about those. So the relying party immediately knows that that's the real person that was issued this credential by the jurisdiction issuing authority. What that provides the relying party is better assurances that they got the right person. Think of the fraud that's committed by a person who doesn't have a true credential every day. If you can stop some of that, now you're narrowing the vectors that have to be considered for fraud mitigation inside both the relying parties world and the issuing authorities world, which getting all of these narrowed down protects the customer in the end. So now you've narrowed the fraud vector, attack vector, to trying to get a credential at an issuing authority that's not yours, but you have to use fake documents, right? I mean, that's the only other way to do this. So now they can concentrate there. The relying party knows who they have, so now they're reducing their fraud footprint, which, in my estimation, would way more than pay for putting in the infrastructure needed to read an MDL. So just that alone is a huge benefit for relying parties and our issuing authorities. But more importantly, it's also an improvement for my customers, which we've said this before. I think some of you heard me say this before. My granddaughters, my daughter and son, my mother, I want them to be safe when they use their credential. I don't want somebody stealing their identity, and MDL provides that for them. So by far, and this is, Ciaran said this too, that cryptography protects people both on the relying party side and on the issuing authority side, and most importantly, our customers.
Absolutely. You know, you're I love that. Thank you for the round room on that question, and I love that we ended off centered on people. And it's actually, you know, my husband had his identity. I wouldn't quite say stolen, but it was kind of a kid thing where someone said, "Oh, they were young, they were kids, so okay, no hard feelings, right?" But because of that, now every time he gets his driver's license renewed, this is, you know, 40 years, 30 years later, he has to go through all these additional processes to get that driver's license renewed. So, you know, just thinking of all those, whether it was a silly thing as kids or a real criminal act, it's often the victim that has to deal with all of the headaches around that. And so any way that these tools can also remove that burden from victims who shouldn't be having that burden, I think that's a great real human feature as well. Okay, so if the the benefits are numerous, efficiency, convenience, security, fraud, cutting off fraud vectors. what would you say are some of, like, why don't we all have this now? What are some of the challenges in terms of implementation and adoption? So what are the challenges that you folks and many of our listeners are working together to tackle to get this off the ground? Who would like to start that one? It's a tough one.
I can give you a couple of things, Joni, and I'm sure others will have something to add. One big thing, it's certainly in the international context that we work, is a diversity of capabilities and resources to invest in this and trying to bring people up to speed so that things can advance in a somewhat aligned manner. So obviously at the international level, there are some people who are advocates for things like this and have a lot of experience from work, because we build, from the foundations of e-passports, etc., have all those capabilities for electronic passports, and have can leverage those capabilities and leverage the people with those knowledge to more quickly implement the digital credentials that we're speaking about. But that's not everybody. So we need to focus on capacity building and bringing people up to speed, and resource supplementation where possible, and knowledge sharing, which is something we dedicate quite significantly to. Upfront costs are another thing. I specifically say upfront costs because I think there are cost savings to be realized in the longer term. Certainly, I think Michael just touched on that. For example, as you issue these things, if it gives you the possibility to slowly move away from investment in costly physical printing with security features, etc., and verification, you can realize cost savings over the long term. Nevertheless, upfront, there's a capital expenditure to, develop your PKI if you haven't got it, or update your PKI if you have it, for the necessity to invest in application processes, facilities, whatever the situation might be. There's going to need to be an investment upfront. And that requires the resources, but also the political buy-in in our circumstance, to recognize the benefits, to listen to conversations like this, recognize the benefits, and make the choice that this is something that will be done. And that appetite should come from the user, the citizens as well, I think, who should realize these benefits. Sometimes there's apprehension. Some parts of it can be legitimate, but in many cases there's misinformation, and there's apprehension coming from misplaced concepts of risk that are not there. And we need to do a job on educating as well, and acting against misinformation, at least when it's when it's stark, and when it's very clear, to make sure that the citizens are also recognizing the benefits, when things like this are rolled out, that there's an appetite to enroll and get your digital travel credential and use it and avail of the benefits that we spoke about a moment ago. That's just a couple of things. I'm sure there's more.
I can probably continue that thread a little bit, Ciaran, with the user why. The DMV, speaking specifically for a second about, US MDLs and the DMVs, is that there's been an incredible effort and amount of work done to get, MDLs off the ground. And it's incredible to have 18 states that are now active. But there continues to be a lot of people looking at the states and saying, why aren't people using it? Where that's the wrong place to be placing that question, because it's not. I mean, the DMVs already did this incredible lift, and they've put in so much effort to just make MDLs possible. They're not the ones that need to be making it possible to use your MDL everywhere out there in the market and, bring the use cases. We need to start turning around and looking to the market and saying, why aren't you guys, driving value for users to ultimately adopt these things and use them? Because it's that why question. Do you know what I mean? Where no one wakes up in the morning and says, I want an ID Me account today, or I'm going to enroll in Clear today because they seem great and I saw a Clear Me ad, on TV yesterday. It's because they have a trip coming up next week, or it's because they want to get a discount on the pair of shoes that they're trying to buy, right? So it's, what is that value driver for the user that's going to make them, execute that behavior to go and get the mobile driver's license? So I think that has been, And then the other side of it is you get the question of, well, why would I add MDL support? How many of my customers have MDLs today? How many MDL transactions am I going to get? What's my return on investment, as a relying party to accept this? So it's, classic chicken and egg problem. Adoption drives adoption. But I
Yep.
think that now that we're getting some supply out there, the pace is starting to become, and we have some, Fortune 10, Fortune 100 companies fairly publicly saying that they see value, they are going to accept this, they are going to help drive that adoption. But I think it is, really looking to the market to make this case and drive value for users. So the why isn't, my DMV told me I can get a mobile driver's license, I should do it. It's that, there's some real value that I'm going to unlock by having it.
Yeah.
Yeah, to pile on to Adam's statements, the egg is hatched.
Mm-hmm.
The MDLs are out on the street in many places. And it's not just in the US and Canada, it's also in 20 some odd countries in Europe. It's also in Japan, it's also in Australia. They're starting to get some foothold in the marketplace on the issuance side. But as with any improved technology, or at least most improved technologies, there's a cost involved. There's a cost to the issuing authority, there's a cost to the customer, meaning they have to change their methodologies and how they use their identities, and not necessarily a cost monetarily. And then there's a cost on the relying party side that they have to one, understand how it can help them. Well, first they have to understand what it is. How does this thing even work? How can it help them? When they see that vision, then they put it in their pipeline to put it into their workflows, which can take years. Well, the MDL hasn't actually been out in many of these states more than 3 or 4 years. So you're still inside that time frame where relying parties are figuring out how this could fit into their workflow. And we're starting to see real propulsion in that industry. We're seeing at least in the North American side, many of the industries really looking at how they can use that. And some of these places that you use on a daily basis are now talking about how they can put this into their workflow. But they have to have a financial investment. And I akin it a little bit to Google, Samsung, Apple Pay. Then when that came out, nobody used it. They had it, but they didn't have anywhere to use it. They were still working with the platform providers were still working with a number of the relying parties and their machines, their point of sale machines, to actually accept it and get them certified. So it took some time to get everybody's mind wrapped around what this thing was and how it could benefit them. And now, for many people, it's second nature to pull out your phone and tap for a credit card.
Yeah.
You almost do it without thinking. I don't, but many people do. It's just because I haven't got used to my workflow personally, and that's a change in how I live life.
Yep.
So I think all of that plays into why we just don't see these things explode, and I don't think you will. I think there's not a person on this call that will actually be alive when you don't need a physical card anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. However, I think we will definitely see an Apple, Google, Samsung Pay kind of situation where many times more than not, you use your digital credential for an identity.
Yeah, and I think choice is so important, right? That people have choices along the way. And I love that you called out that you likely won't see a time where you don't have a physical and a digital. I've had so many conversations where people think you're either going to have a physical card or a digital card, and it's like, no, you should have both of those things. Maybe one stays in your drawer, maybe you carry both, but it's not an either or. It's augmenting and adding to that ecosystem. So I've got 2 more questions and we have about 10 more minutes. So let's do a quick round robin. I wanted to ask another question too about, do you think that, part of that adoption landscape, we talked a lot about market building and kind of ecosystem building. Do you think that, do risk management frameworks or governance frameworks play an important part in this as well? Like, I could imagine that some of that uncertainty or some of the background on bringing that market forward is around what contracts are needed and what liability models are there. And so any thoughts about the importance of governance and risk management frameworks in the space to help with adoption?
I think there are things that need to be put into place that are being put into place that are actually model agreements where issuing authorities need to make sure that they are issuing credentials correctly. Now, one of the reasons that say that is because AAMVA has for the PKI solution, AAMVA has a digital trust service where you can obtain the public keys that you need to authenticate MDLs. That's an agreement kind of thing you need to do. But I also want to keep in mind that, and I like hearing speak for the ICAO world, but in the MDL space, it's up to the customer as to how and when they use either their physical or their digital credential. And so that agreement between relying parties and issuing authorities is not necessarily a thing that has to happen. It doesn't happen today with physical. So in the digital space, it's the same concept. The customer is always in control and they do what they want to with their identity, what they need to do authentication. So I don't think it's as much a agreement situation as is a policy situation from both relying parties and issuing authorities around how they're going to issue, how they're going to consume, what do they do for the relying parties, what do they do on the what I'll call the backside of the transaction to ensure they've done things properly, that they've maintained their government required data sets to ensure they've done the right identity checks for age or what have you for these controls. So it's more of it's not an agreement between entities, it's more of a policy inside each one of the entities.
Yeah. Any thoughts to add, Ciaran?
Yeah, so I'd start off when we were speaking about risk, fully agree with Michael. Policy is an important driver of where the risk lies and if there are particular risks. An important policy element for our development of the digital travel credential in ICAO was that it is as secure and functions in the same way as the electronic passport. It builds on the PKI and is able to leverage the same infrastructure and doesn't add in any additional process risk or user risk compared to the use of the e-passport. So that's a policy decision that was set at the beginning, and all development is underpinned by that policy decision, which means exactly as Michael says, when it comes to it, a user and a government that wants to issue a digital travel credential or wants to verify a digital travel credential doesn't need to do a new analysis and risk analysis, etc. We already know and we already have analyzed the risks and have mitigated those risks to the extent of our need. And we make a decision as an individual user, as an individual traveler, and as a government to move forward with these things based on the benefits and based on the benefits that we see ourselves. And by the way, different governments will see different benefits at different stages. Obviously, if you're a big government with many citizens, the resource requirements required to issue these on a per capita basis is much less than obviously if you're a small little island somewhere. And when you get down to state level, I can imagine with AAMVA, etc., there's some similarities there. So one can focus on the benefits and the business case, let's say, in our situation, while somewhat, I won't say ignoring, but as long as you accept, which is a design criterion, that it doesn't introduce any additional risks and is as secure, if not more secure, than the paper document, the electronic document in our case. It's a pure business case decision. So the governance is more on the business case than anything else. Because for us, all that governance was done previously.
Yeah, and I think, speaking up for myself, and not on behalf of anybody else, but I think like the e-passport, the chip and the passport is such a great example of an enabler. You've got that in there, you're holding the passport. Now how you use that for verification, how you use that capability, the choice in the hands of the holder, like that's really a great example of enabling these types of capabilities in an ecosystem. Okay, let's do a lightning round. And the lightning round is what should we look for in the near future in terms of advancement in this space on the collaboration side? Like you're imagining your headline in 5 years in the future. What should we be looking for in the digital credential space? Who wants to go first on that one? Adam.
Okay.
Oh, Michael, you go. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Today we're seeing the reason we went in-person use first on our own standardization is because, believe it or not, that was the easy topic. Over the internet use of a digital credential is a very difficult topic to tackle because of privacy, security, and all the known problems that the internet can have. So we've gone through a lot of efforts to get over the internet use of MDL standardized so that it can be used safely. I think in the coming months and up to 5 years, what you're really going to see explode is the use of identity over the internet in places where it needs to be used. Not in places where it doesn't, but in places where you need to identify yourself to do whatever. Buy a plane ticket. You can go online and buy a plane ticket today, but it'd be nice if you could truly identify yourself in the ways that that the airlines would need, and those kinds of things. So I think that's what you're going to see in the very near future. And so, and in 5 years, I think it's going to be it'll be normalcy at that time and those kinds of things.
Super cool. Like if I had my my QR code or whatever credential for my plane ticket, my identity verification was built into that. So it's like one ceremony. That's in my future. That's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Who wants to go next? Lightning round.
I can jump in quickly, and I think Joni, your mention there of identity bound with something, I think is also something that is going to arise. Payments being one area that is quite interesting, where things are getting potentially a little bit more bound, where you need some form of identity or age verification while you're also executing a payment. So you can imagine tap to pay, where you're presenting your loyalty card and you're verifying your age and you're actually paying. So I think something, in that area is definitely going to be interesting over maybe not the nearish term, but definitely, over your 5-year horizon. I think short term, we're also going to see more private sector credential issuance for travel use cases. So I think that's a really interesting one. Obviously government issued, et cetera, but I do think we're going to see some on the private sector side to, bootstrap going digital for travel. And then 100% agree, Mike, on the online use cases. We are obviously very involved in pushing that ourselves. So I'm excited to see how that progresses, over the next, we're probably talking, quarterly here, that things are going to move pretty quickly. And the last piece I would leave with is just, much deeper integrations into the platforms that we use. So deeper integration into your phone, into your browser, into your, operating system. So we're getting, tap to pay style experiences more holistically.
Amazing. Ciaran, the final word is with you.
Thank you. Honored to have the final word. Let me say something that was a really profound, I think, and a great achievement. The Finnish pilot of the digital travel credential was nominated last year by Time magazine as one of the top 200 innovations of the year, which says a lot, I think. That shows that this is getting mainstream attention, this kind of area of digital credentials. It's not something that's niche, that the guys around the table here and the ladies around the table talk about. It's getting mainstream attention. That says to me, next 5 years, we're going to see real life applications in the travel continuum, certainly where I'm active. We'll certainly have the cooperation of the private sector. The program that I'm working on, the PKD, we have a private sector pilot. We're rolling out a program to increase that cooperation between governments and private sector. And I think where we're leading towards is choice-based usage of these digital travel credentials in the next 5 years or so. Of course, the physical credential will be around for a long, long time, decades. But for those people who are the forerunners and have the appetite and have the capability, I think we'll see quite a significant use of these credentials within a 5-year window.
Awesome. Well, you've left us with some visions for the future. Thanks so much for sharing your insights through this discussion today. We'll include details in the notes for this discussion for anyone who'd like to follow up or connect. And keep up the collaboration and keep up the work. Thanks for joining us, folks. And we'll see. We'll mark this date and we'll look 5 years in the future and see how everything turned out. Thanks for all your commitment to the work and joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.